Unfortunately, Simon could not join us. Simon is the team lead at Irena. He sends his best wishes. Hopefully, we can have him on the next edition coming up by June or September, right? But Simon sends his greetings to us. So let me just dive into the welcome address. I'm looking forward to a very robust conversation on today's webinar. All right, so just to confirm that. Victor. All right, so
Awesome.
so this conversation was a spin-off of a discussion we had in California last year. All right, so I was honored to meet Gil James, Gil Gibson, and Alan Nelson, the VP of SLB, and we had a crucial conversation around chemical engineers and energy transition. And the session was a very, very wide, was sort of wide spectrum. And one of the fundamental consensus was that we have to have a global perspective towards energy transition. We have vast amounts of natural resources, from oil to gas and the likes, but we have to have this conscious mindset shift as to the future we want to create. And that's why these conversations are very, very important. We have to agree on a direction we want to navigate towards the future. And one crucial tool which could help this journey for us is the carbon market. And on today's session, I'll just be sharing a little on how the carbon market could actually help advance our journey towards net zero. We'll have Gail and you to come up later to talk more about accelerating energy transition. Right, just to start with Africa. So Africa is home to me, a continent I love so much. I'll just give you some updates of what is happening around here, seeing ways whereby we can work together to achieve the future we want. So currently in Africa, we have about 258.3 gigawatts of energy in total capacity based on reports from PwC last year. So this is data from 2023. And we can see a lot of gas, a lot of coal, some hydro, some solar, right? And looking at the renewable aspect, we can see it actually increasing, but we still have a very long way to go. I'm very happy that countries like Nigeria, we have the energy transition plan, and we have some carbon market activation plans, but still we have a very, very long way to go to achieve our results, right? So diving deeper, if you look at the clean energy landscape in Africa, we can see 67.5 gigawatts in 2023. That sounds so enormous, right? So massive, but still, it's still a far cry, because in 2023, we had 473 gigawatts of clean energy across the globe. A majority of these was in USA, China, and the EU, right? They had 83% of the 473 gigawatts. So Africa actually has a very large land mass to cover. And looking at the map of Africa, we might think Africa is so small, but Africa is actually very large. It can accommodate the USA, China, India, and some parts of EU, right? So Africa has a very large landscape, and we still have a very long way to go in order to achieve renewable sustainability. So looking at the Africa case study in-depthly, we can see even at Africa, we still have a lot of disparity between North Africa and the Sub-Saharan Africa. So North Africa has a lot of renewables. Just from these charts, we can see a lot of renewables from North Africa, but the other parts, Southern Africa, West Africa, and East Africa are still lagging behind. We have a very long way to go. So what is the way forward? How can we help close this gap as fast as possible? And that's the focus of today's session. How can we close this gap as fast as possible? We need a just energy transition. We know we cannot achieve energy in a vacuum. It has to improve people's lives. It has to be affordable. It has to be accessible. And we've seen a lot of progress from 2010 to 2022, but we still have a long way to go. We have a long way to go. We can see a 14% increase in access to electricity across Sub-Saharan Africa. We can also see a 12% increase in access to clean cooking across Sub-Saharan Africa. but there's still a long way in achieving these sustainable goals. One crucial element is energy investments, right? We've seen a lot of investments, but there's still a lot more to be done. And when it comes to the tools for investments, we have equity financing, we have debt, we have grants, we have guarantees, and we have carbon markets. And carbon markets can be a game changer, not just for Africa, but across the globe. And we are looking at the voluntary aspect of the carbon markets, that is the VCMs. So in Africa, we've seen a lot of VCMs for forestry and land use, but very little for energy and other areas. And as Chemotronics, we believe we can channel more of these instruments towards energy transition in Africa. Just so some background to the ACMI. ACMI is Africa Carbon Market Initiative, and it was established in 2022, right? And they are looking at maturing the market such that we have a lot of supply, demand, and financing. And one of the goals of the ACMI is to ensure that we have a matured market by 2040. So the plan is to establish the market 2030, mature it by 2040, and develop high value by 2050. So you can do well to check the reports for more information. So we have a long way to go. There's a lot of ground to cover, but with everyone on this call, we believe we can work together to achieve that future. Right? This is just one of the projects Motoring is trying to work on. And yeah, you can reach out to support and partner with us, right? So what's the way forward? We need a lot of R&D in Africa. We need a lot of R&D to increase the energy transition, and that calls for a lot of investments. And also we need to channel the tool of carbon markets to fund clean energy projects over in Africa. And finally, we have to develop the demand side. So for the carbon credits to work, we have to work very well on the demand side of things. I'm learning more about that today's webinar from our speakers. So you can check these reports, the PwC Africa Energy Review, Arena with Energy Transition Reports, Arena Sub-Saharan Africa Policies and Finance for Renewable Energy, the ACMI Status and Outlook Reports, ACMI Advanced Market Signal Presentation, and the ACMI Roadmap Reports. Thank you very much. We are very happy to have you here. We are hand over now to Victor as we continue today's session.
All right. Thank you so much, Peace, for that wonderful perspective, especially coming from the African standpoint. Yes, thank you so much once again. Next up, we have Hugh James and Gil Gibson. Just permit me to share my screen. All right. Okay. Awesome. All right. So we have Hugh James and Gil Gibson, who will be sharing, also from the energy perspective from North America, as well as, Europe and Middle East, the EMEA region. I would like to introduce Gil just now. So Gil Gibson is a senior fellow at Mission Impossible Partnership and a process and product development consultant. She has a rich background in engineering, having retired, after 34 years at DuPont, where she served as head of engineering and chief of staff to the CEO. Gil's expertise spans product, process development, commercialization, innovation practices, business strategy, supply chain improvement, and fostering inclusive workplaces as well. She's also served, on the board of Carbon Engineering and is an active member of AICHE chairing this grants committee. Thank you so much once again, Gil, for honoring us. I would also like to introduce Hugh James as well. Hugh James is the CEO of Project Commercialization Group, PCG, with an extensive experience across various industries. That's including engineering, construction, chemicals, energy, and mining. He has worked globally, contributing to projects such as the Korea's LNG import plant and energy startups. He's also passionate about, supporting early stage ventures and has served in various corporate and advisory boards, including, those focused on energy and Princeton University's technology commercialization. Once again, welcome and thank you so much for honoring us. Yes, we would like to have you now, Hugh James and as well as Gil Gibson.
Well, that's a nice graphic there. Thank you, Victor, and thank you, Peace, for that excellent introduction, and welcome everyone today. You know, reflecting as Peace was talking, it's so important in these kind of areas of climate solutions that we do convene and talk about where we are. Things happen so quickly that it's important to sort of, one, connect on not only what's going on, but get different perspectives. There's a lot of learnings happening every day all over the world, and thank you to Chemotronics for sponsoring this. Peace asked Hugh and I to talk a little bit about, very quickly, the energy landscape of North America, including carbon credits. And then I'm going to share some learnings, and I've titled it Decarbonization Learnings, but it comes mostly from the work of Mission Possible Partnership. But it really is about many, many, many projects all over the world. And how do you ramp up these types of new market and balance things like supply and demand? So we hope this will help stimulate some more thoughts, and we look forward to your questions. And please put comments in the chat. So first, the sort of energy landscape, if you will. This is a Sankey diagram. I love them because it's everything on one page, but it's probably not good because the text is very small. But for the United States, on the left, you can see the sources of energy, and on the right, where that energy goes. Obviously, on the left-hand side, a tremendous amount, over 3/4 still comes from fossil fuels, and this is as of 2023. On the right-hand side, maybe surprises some people, but transportation consumes the most. And sometimes we think about our facilities, whether that's manufacturing facilities or our homes, but the movement of goods and people really does consume quite a bit. So you can kind of get a quick feel for the different sources and uses there in the United States. A similar diagram, tinier print, but for Canada, if you look at the blue on the left, those are the sources of energy, and it's all fossil fuels really, except for those very small blue portions, sort of almost to the bottom. And then on the right, I want you to focus on the orange, sort of on the bottom part of the chart. That's really where some of that energy is going. And you'll see industry is slightly bigger than transportation for Canada. And again, this is 2023 data. This chart also shows in gray sort of the import-export situation, and mostly involving all fossil fuels. So another snapshot for Canada. And then for Mexico, a little bit different diagram, but the energy supply from 2023 there is on the top, and you can see the portions from fossil fuels are dominant, over 80%. And then the consumption on the bottom, and again, transportation rises up as the top sector, followed by industry and residential. So it shows you that there are differences locally, and you could almost take this to individual state or governments or communities and have slightly different pictures. And so this is where a global picture makes sense, but also you have to get very much into a regional picture like the African carbon market initiatives, or even a more local than that, whether it's by country or jurisdictions. When you think about goals, now what are these countries very quickly trying to do? And in many regards, there's been commitments or intentions or statements or dialogue in the press around reaching net zero by 2050, which was part of the Paris Agreement. Canada is committed. They have laws passed, so they are very locked in. Mexico is not quite that strongly committed, but they have clearly stated goals and are part of the Paris Agreement. And then, if you haven't heard already, with the new administration in the United States, that there has been a withdrawal from the Paris Agreement and kind of an intent to unravel a lot of the strong hooks and regulations put in place regarding greenhouse gas emissions. But even with that, at the end of January, 24 states, so 24 out of 50, have committed to these above goals. In terms of how are they getting to 2050 net zero, various attempts or objectives put in place around reduction of greenhouse gases. And the asterisk means it's versus a baseline in 2005. So Canada strongly committed to nearly half reduction of greenhouse gases by 2035, which is nominally in 10 years. Mexico is trying to get 35% reduction in just 5 more years by 2030. And the United States, about half. And the states that are committed to these goals have various objectives that are roughly 50%. Some might be slightly less, some more by 2030, some by 2035. So you really have to uncover how are governments putting specific targets and objectives, and then are there penalties involved with those, right? Are there laws that have been passed, or just, you could say, encouragement, and how are these things enforced? What I did not capture here, and I think you and I will touch on this, is what are companies doing, right? So industry and various corporations are doing a lot of different things to pursue net zero, including a number of oil companies that have net zero goals. And that's another piece that you have to get underneath. What is each one doing? And then for like a global company, you know, where are their facilities where they're doing some of those things? So the data is really important when you understand where are we and then where do we want to go. So here in the United States, thinking about carbon markets, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Hugh to talk a little bit more about what's the situation here with carbon markets in the United States.
With respect to carbon markets, the United States does not have a national carbon market, carbon abatement trading system. Instead, it is being driven by the various states. The 2 leading states doing it are California and Washington. They start from a cap and trade basis. And they have domestic markets in the state for carbon trading. The fundamental difference between California and Washington is that Washington also has a program where it takes some of the carbon trading value and it turns that into a program of rebates to consumers of electricity because of the belief that the cost of electricity is associated with the transition is higher than from traditional approaches. California and Oregon don't have that sort of thing. On the East Coast, 11 states have gone into initially carbon abatement associated with power generation. And that includes states that range from Maine all the way down to New York, New Jersey. Carbon abatement of power had been the initial driver that led to an interest in carbon management. And much of the program still revolves around the concepts associated with control of carbon emissions from power plants. The East Coast has a cap and trade approach. They also have, the 11 states have a regionalized market for carbon credits. Which are run under a common set of rules, and those credits can be used in any one of those 11 states. The more dramatic thing about the United States is how much of the country has nothing. And that is very visible in the very center of the country. But the United States has been very, very divided in the population, and there hasn't been a strong driver yet of a global consensus that we need carbon trading. We need a more organized approach to carbon emission management. And that is something that you can see it playing out in press all over the world because the rest of the world, much of the rest of the world has actually moved further along in concern about this than the United States has right now. So that's basically where it stands. And while there's technology in the States and there is some regulatory lessons, it certainly is not the leader right now in this subject.
Thank you, Hugh. And, there has been some discussion within the U.S. Department of Agriculture regarding carbon footprint and carbon credit opportunities with farmers. And some of you that may be familiar with the United States, the Farm Belt, we call it, is that middle part of the country. And I think dialogues will continue to evolve there because there is a carbon opportunity for credits, but there's also carbon footprints that have to be addressed. So a complex situation, very much like many other aspects of the world. So I was going to talk a little bit now about some learnings that might apply, and this comes from Mission Impossible Partnership. This is a nonprofit focused on helping decarbonize. So basically, it's a convener, share of best practices and learnings, and I am a part of that as a senior fellow. What they do is focus on helping to accelerate decarbonization in the top 7 sectors, and you can see those here. There are sector strategies out on the website at this link if you want to dive more into some of these to see, what is the kind of key levers for acceleration and what is the status. Interestingly, this group also works with people around the world to capture what are the projects, what are things that are actually happening. So you can see what's actually operating in these solid line circles, what projects have reached the final investment decision. So these are not operating yet, but capital monies have been committed. And then what are things that have been announced? And probably like aspects of Africa, the announcements, the pipeline of announcements is good, although we don't have enough projects to be to net zero by the timelines desired. But announcements versus reaching the investment decision, so when money is actually allocated and spent, there's been a slowdown, and that's due to a variety of reasons. But this is out there on the website, this global project tracker. Feel free to search it yourselves. And I just took a snapshot of various projects happening in Africa across these different sectors. So Hugh, did you want to comment on some of this opportunities?
Yeah, I have a couple of comments, Gail. And the first is, unlike the United States, when you look at Europe, you see a lot of projects everywhere on the continent. And there is much greater demand pull in the marketplace in Europe. And it really is the customer who is redefining the definition of sustainability and carbon management. There's a European consultant, Simon and Kucher, who have written a book about this redefining that the consumer is doing and promoting sustainable technologies, implementation, and increasing demand of it. And in fact, it's actually topic, the book is used in one of the courses at MIT for part of it, for people to understand the importance of demand pull as opposed to supply push. The second thing is you have to look at the history of carbon credits, carbon management. It started off with the Kyoto Protocols in 1997. Which really weren't implemented until 2005. The Kyoto Protocols were a country-by-country commitment. And it collapsed because while countries talked highly of it, resources were not being reallocated around the globe for achieving the desired outcome. That led then to the Paris Convention, which in 2008, if I remember my dates correctly, it finally implemented in 2015, which redefined it as a global objective and created a carbon management mechanism, global in scope, to promote countries and markets to work together to develop projects. And this has led to projects working across borders. And the Europeans have put in place a number of different programs in different countries, which are actually using carbon credits from Europe to develop projects elsewhere in the world. That's first comment on that. The second, I go back to, I point to the few projects that are showing here, and I go back to my map, which of Africa. And when you take a look at it currently, India is an up and rising country in carbon credit management. The Modi government actually passed a national program based on the Paris Convention and is talking to other countries. The United States, we've talked about, has been is still debating. Germany, France, Spain, Switzerland, Italy have all been setting up credit financing, credit programs, and also doing it across borders. China is kind of doing it, but it's doing it as a state program where the state is actually defining carbon credits and then giving those out to new projects for financing. And I've been told that the Belt and Roads program of China has done some cross-border financing of projects, but I have not identified any specific examples of one.
Thank you, Hugh.
And last, I would like to note Africa. There's a lot of opportunity, and Africa is very conveniently located to Europe, and the Europeans are already showing commitments to go cross-border.
So some of what Hugh is talking about is related to this demand and supply picture. So I just wanted to share, these are kind of some key learnings from Mission Possible Partnership around these many, many projects. And carbon markets, while it's not a specific project, it relates on the decarbonization efforts. First, we all know there's not enough projects yet to reach the goals. So trying to uncover how to accelerate is important. Market forces at the end of the day drive the growth. You know, there's a lot around compliance, government incentives, but at the end of the day, to sustain the market forces and drive demand and the supply to meet it, we need the economics. And as Hugh said, customers need to have the demands. Now, what Mission Possible Partnership sees is that there are some targeted interventions, if you will, that can accelerate growth and drive scale. So sometimes scale up of the supply side, as technical people, as chemical engineers. Some of us might say we understand that part, but there's also driving scale in market demand. The forces may vary depending on the location and situation. So I think you're getting, you know, the nuance very well, that it varies by country and it may even vary within countries of different regions. Financing and economics. Both of these we know are very important and we'd like to have those solved, and it's not an easy problem to solve. But I believe a lot of that is intertwined with around the perception of risk. So the risk profiles of what people perceive are out there, make some of the economics even more challenging. And I think that's very applicable in carbon markets. Some of us that are technically trained can can de-risk the technical aspects around technologies and scale-ups and pilot plants and things like that. But there's also ways to de-risk things from a financial standpoint. And then looking at those opportunities to de-risk is where I think those key points are around acceleration. Thinking about this picture overall, I'd like you to think about what's called the S-curve. So some of you that went to business school might be familiar with that, or that if you've been involved with product development. But you'll see on the left here what's called an S-curve, because it's shaped like the S, around adoption for various new technologies. And some of these you can see S-curves may be getting even more accelerated in their ramp-ups over time as the world population increases, more information is shared, and demand gets more globalized. Looking at the S-curve a little bit, there's some tipping points, if you will. You know, in the early days, technology may be ready for things that are technology scale up, but market might not be, or vice versa. When market starts to form, this means paying customers at the price points of things that exist at that point in time. When that begins to form, then you reach a tipping point of around 5 to 10%. This might vary slightly, but when you kind of get to that phrase, then the ramp up can really start. And some of the stall that happens is certainly in this early stage technology, but a lot of stalls happen right here before the tipping point. And I think that's key to think about. How do I unlock and stay persistent and do little pieces to begin to build that picture? And I believe this applies to the creation of carbon markets. A different picture here, and I'm not going to cover all this in detail, but thinking about green markets, carbon markets relates to very much a green market. There are premiums involved. This means price points aren't as cheap, if you will, as incumbents for a variety of applications. Other price points are already below, like solar panels can provide cheaper energy in various regions of the world than the incumbent. So market formation is a key phase. Market acceleration, you have to really look at the points of failure and how do you address those. And then at the end of the day, what we think we'd all like is how to accelerate. So move this adoption curve from the right more to the left. That increases the slope of this curve. That's what we all like to do with respect to progress toward net zero and creation of carbon markets. So looking for the nodes or the variables that can help accelerate are key. And Mission Possible Partnership involved with a lot of different shareholders, stakeholders, projects, people making investments, doing work around the world, have created this toolbox for what they call green market makers. And I think this might be a useful tool. It'll be part of the deck here. I'm not going to talk about it in detail, but depending on the phase of things you think are involved and how to accelerate, here's a lot of different things. And I know for carbon markets, a big discussion has been financing. Another big discussion is really around verification, right? Integrity and trust in the system. So I'm going to stop there. Again, you'll have this chart to look at later. And I think turn it back over to Victor, but maybe Peace, you want to show us your t-shirt. I just noticed your t-shirt has some writing on it. So maybe you want to show us.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Peace has driving emissions to net zero. Right there on his t-shirt. All right, thank you so much once again, Hugh and Gail, for such an elaborate perspective, especially some of those, decarbonization learning, how we can, de-risk from both technological and financial perspective. I know Hugh also, showed us that concentration of projects just outside Africa there. So there's huge potential and huge possibilities to some of the things that can be achieved. Right here as well in Africa. Thank you so much once again. Just so out there to the audience, we would also still be having, a panel session. So that's where, you can hear from the speakers directly, ask questions. And of course, I know some other folks are dropping questions in the chat right now. So please do well to, also drop your questions as well. So we'll be having a quick 2-minute break. So you can just, grab a bottle of water. I would also run some polls right now just to see where certain people stand on certain poll-related questions. Yeah, so I would see you in about 2 minutes time. So please do well to partake of the polls as well. Thank you once again.
Yeah, thank you, Victor. So I think while Victor drops the poll, probably you could also play the video. I think Bolu can put up the video from my end.
The effects of climate change are fast becoming a menace to the world. This is no time to cast blame, but everyone must come together, deploying innovative solutions to ensure global temperature rise doesn't exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2030. Reports show that the chances are slim, but with the rapid development of clean tech solutions, the mission to a more sustainable future is possible. At Chemotronics, we are integrating digital solutions to accelerate the development of clean tech solutions across various communities, fast-tracking our journey to net zero. We have built a decentralized monitoring, reporting, and verification system to rectify the current issues plaguing the carbon credit market. Our solution, financing and developing clean energy solutions, will be faster, cheaper, and easier, ensuring a smoother pathway to net zero. The digital technologies currently utilized involve the combining power of AI, blockchain, clean energy, and IoT to offset greenhouse gas emissions. Our smart IoT device provides real-time monitoring of GHGs, which will help companies and governments align with their ESG goals. To guarantee authenticity, the data is logged onto a decentralized storage, which will help companies offset GHGs and enable purchasing quality carbon credits from pilot projects developed across the world. Our solution provides a network of collaboration between developing and developed countries, fast-tracking our commitment to tripling renewable energy access across the globe, while drastically reducing emissions to achieve net zero in the shortest possible time. This will help accelerate biogas, hydrogen, solar farms, and clean tech solutions, creating at least 10,000 jobs over the next 5 years, impacting over 1 million individuals through the instrument of effective climate financing, while offsetting and avoiding at least 100,000 tons of GHGs in the next 5 years. Chemotronics is changing the narrative of the carbon market to achieve our climate goals. Together, let's journey to achieve a sustainable future.
All right, thank you, Victor, for that video. So I think we've relaxed a little bit. So it's time for the panel session. This is the highlight of today's session. All right, so we would allow for people to unmute, but that's much later. If you have any question, like Victor said earlier, just drop in the chat. All right, so without further ado, we'll be starting our panel session shortly. So I'm glad to be the moderator for this session. And thanks so much, Yu and Gail, for staying with us. So yeah, it's a roundtable discussion. and we have a lot of interesting things to talk about. Like Victor had introduced, Gail and you, they have a lot of experience. They've worked with companies, Fortune 50, Fortune 100 companies, and they've seen how the market economics affects the carbon footprint of companies, right? So we are talking about discussions that would help advance the market, not just in Africa, but across the globe. So let me start with Gail. So I know Gail has done some work with the board of advisors at Carbon Engineering, and one major issue with the carbon markets is that when it comes to carbon removal projects, you have the likes of CCUS, direct air capture, carbon capture, utilization and storage. They are very, very expensive, and investors worry about the profitability of investing in such projects. So you talk about the S-curve in your presentation. So my question to you is, how can we de-risk these technologies into more effective projects, especially looking at a continent like Africa? Africa has little investments in direct air capture and CCUS, and these are like the most profitable carbon market projects, but they are also they have high risk, right? So just to cut my question, how can we ensure that investments in CCUS and direct air capture are de-risked through the carbon markets?
Yeah, appreciate that question. So maybe I'll talk a little bit about the direct air capture I was involved in. So Carbon Engineering had a technology for direct air capture. They were bought out by Oxy Petroleum. And some people thought that was not a good purchase because it was kind of, greens being bought out by big oil. But it turns out what Oxy Petroleum has is wonderful expertise around reservoirs and engineering. So they have a lot of networks and expertise that helps them with CCUS, so carbon capture and storage. And Carbon Engineering did not have that. So when you think about how do I get something to the marketplace, it's not just direct air capture. You got to do something with that captured CO2. And Oxy has that expertise. The other thing is looking at it is this needs large scale, right? Direct air capture needs a lot of facilities around the world. And we learned a lot about where to put the facilities, how much they would cost. And then it became who's willing to make that first large investment. And that's been a tough road, right? It's taken years, both on the technology side to get improvements in yield, get the cost points down, both for capital investment as well as operating investment. But a big company that has the opportunity to invest significant amounts and to see that through was really the best marriage. And the marriage was related to people that want to be lead, right? They want to be lead adopters. And they were large enough to maybe not have the economics to be ideal. The economics will get better with time. They very well know that. But sometimes if you want that first facility or first new thing to pay off in an economic way, it's difficult. So finding a marriage with partners that are looking longer term, are willing to, one, be also very smart about the risks they know and are used to handling, not people new to that area, and then willing to see it through and bring their own expertise. I think those kind of partnerships that both parties own together, and ultimately it was an acquisition, so it's one company. So if you're working with a different company, I think it can be a little bit harder. Direct air capture is a forming market, right? It does sell carbon credits. They have been successful with lead adopter companies that want to have those credits. Some of those are airlines related to regulations related to sustainable aviation fuel. So you could say there's some compliance aspect to it, but there's also voluntary companies like hockey teams and, that want that sort of green label to be seen to be doing something good with their consumers. have also already bought into some of those carbon credits in a very early stage. So I think it's hard at the initial stages. You got to be very persistent and find partners, I think, that understand the risk profile and are willing to look a little bit longer term, is my view.
Yeah, thanks so much, Gil. I think long-term investments is really, really crucial for the carbon market. And I know buyers like Microsoft. Microsoft is the largest buyer of carbon credits across the globe. And I know they're working on data centers, how to have lower emission from data centers. Companies like Delta Airlines, they're also into buying carbon credits. So I think these companies have a lot of science and R&D. I think they get to understand how this investment works. But for some new people entering the carbon market sector, they might not understand this technology difference, right? So I agree with you. We have to have a long-term investments if we want to see DAC payoff, all right? So now to you. So my question to you is more about the carbon pricing mechanism, right? So you mentioned how that in the United States you have states leading the carbon market policy. We don't have like a federal government framework, but we have states leading the charge. So, but in the EU, we have the European trading system. How can we harness this kind of a mechanism to help develop a more solid carbon market? If you're looking at Africa, Africa is just coming up. We have the ACMI trying to guide our decision in the carbon market here in Africa. So, but from experience in the energy industry, LNG, a lot of development projects, what kind of pricing mechanisms do you think can help the carbon markets to have better projects to be financed across the globe?
That's a good question. And I think it's actually got two levels to it. The first one is to get people thinking about sustainable development. And in Africa, you have a large fraction of the population who actually have no power. As your chart piece showed, it's in the tens of percent, multiple tens of percent in much of the continent. So the first is setting up of microgrids and doing what in the United States back in the 1920s was called the Rural Electrification Act. And that is to introduce and get the population understanding what the technology is. Because if you have a number of people who don't have electricity, they're not going to be advocating that sort of thing. And politicians follow the people. So you need things that promote government, popular pressure on government. That's the first thing. Second, with respect to the projects, I think you can learn from what others have done by working with others. And if I take a look currently, you've had places, Uganda, Kenya, have worked with Europeans to develop carbon credits and carbon financing for projects would be the second part of it. And I think the third part is you need to take a look at carbon bonds, which is another form of carbon futures, because until you have a project, you actually can't make it. A carbon credit is something that gives a permit to somebody else to do a project. If you don't have a market and you don't have carbon credits and you don't have projects, you don't have a mechanism for getting started to get the thing flowing. And I think that's where things like what Chematronics is looking at are a step in the right direction, because you're tying it into agriculture and microgrid into the local community, which could be tapped into a more distant grid. But more importantly, you're starting off with a project that has bankability because it can be tied into other activities of another portion of the industry sector. Because until you can get a project and you can get the carbon credit certification of the viability of that project for carbon credits, you yourself don't have the carbon credits to sell. So that's kind of my comment, if I've understood your question correctly.
Yeah. Thanks so much. You've struck some very, very crucial points. Having quality projects, very, very crucial. And one of the objectives of ACMI, that's Africa Carbon Markets Initiative, is to ensure that we have high quality projects. Because for every market targeting growth, you want to build trust, you want to build transparency, you want to ensure there is no double counting as has plagued the carbon market for years, right? So the issue of quality projects is very, very crucial, right? But just staying with you, right? So when it comes to the project development, you mentioned bankability, and I know we discussed about some projects in Florida where they're using like solar panels for university communities just to power their systems. So what kind of business models, you've worked across Australia, you've worked across Africa, literally you've worked across the globe, right? So what kind of business models do you think can help develop the African carbon markets in terms of increasing demand for credits here?
Yeah, the business model you hit on the first part is integrity. And the integrity of the certification of what's being done, because that's the weak link in the carbon system. All it will take is one dishonest project to destroy the credibility in an area. The second thing that is needed for developing projects is a look at what it takes to do a project in a country. I know when I worked in Algeria, the biggest problem we had developing power development there wasn't getting money. It wasn't having a customer base. It was getting the equipment into the country. And the tariff structure was such that, firstly, it took and changed completely the economics of what you were doing. Secondly, there was a tariff on any equipment that was brought in. To get around that, we actually had to negotiate. We negotiated with the government and got permission to be able to bring in equipment. But if we exported it from the country, we wouldn't have to pay the tariff on that. And it worked out to be cheaper than selling the equipment in the country and paying the tariff. So that's the second part, is the role of government and the relationship of the government to the projects. And that's always a big challenge, not because governments aren't interested in it. It's just that they proceed slower than you or I would want them to proceed. And that's the second thing that I found. The third is a population and champions within the society who want to see that type of business developed. And without those, you can't get the government problem resolved for sure. And the last one is the promotion and people who really want to be customers or see themselves as beneficiaries of that development. And if you talk about putting a gold mine in the middle of Nigeria, and you're going to use cyanide for your gold purification, you know for sure you're not going to have a lot of public support for it, even though it might be good for the economy if you had gold. That is what you're doing with this is you actually are promoting something that is good. And you need to get people to realize that it's good for them because it is good. And that, I think, is the last and most important thing, which means you need the press, you need the television, you need social networking, all being managed for what you're trying to do.
Yeah, thanks so much. I think the last point is a very, very important because we need public consensus. The public they must know the value of what these projects mean to the economies of nations. I think even looking at the United States with the recent policy around the oil sector, drill, baby drill, it has caused a lot of issues. But having this kind of education across the globe, what value would carbon markets unlock, is a very, very crucial one which countries must have. And that will lead me to my next question to Gail. So I know on Gail's slide, she talked about the mechanisms for the markets showing the slope. So I want us to also talk about the international trade policies. You know, you have a lot of projects in various nations. For instance, in Africa, we are just having assembly plants for solar panels. We still have to import most of the technology from probably China or EU. And for a country like USA, we have a lot of tariffs going on. So what kind of policies we recommend for government for us to have a very fair market and to have a more uniform market across the globe, such that the carbon credit from Africa can also be of high value like the one in the EU or carbon credits in the USA? How can we have more quality carbon credits across the globe? What policies would enable this to be achieved?
Well, in short, policies that bring those parties together across borders, right? So there are some consortiums, some associated World Economic Forum, some with the UN, some are privately done. Mission Possible Partnership worked on trying to get more dialogue between South America and Europe on what they called a green trading corridor, only on specific things. So that shipping corridor. So I guess what I'd say is bring it down to very real examples that you're trying to alleviate or sort of some barriers that generally can be solved. One of the things that concerns me in going into these kind of markets is, if you're trying to say we've got a lot of sun and daylight and we can have a lot of solar, but you're dependent on solar panels imported from China, then your economic opportunity is only the margin above, right? And then when you put in tariffs or taxes and tax incentives, I guess my view is those are always very temporary. So it might create economics in a temporary way, but it's not sustainable. So I always want to have an eye toward what are those more sustainable economic advantages. So if there's an intent to make solar panels, right, in Africa or do it some other way, and that's a stepping stone, right? Importing is a stepping stone to something else that's viewed to be more sustainable and long-term. I think that's usually a better strategy. It doesn't mean there isn't opportunity in the short term. There is. I guess I'm just saying, look at what comes after that, because a margin is going to be thin and it's subject to other people and their actions to, profit off that margin. And that's, to me, not a good sustainable position to be in. It might be a good temporary one. So I don't know that that fully answers your question piece. And I also see there's some questions in the chat as well.
I think, Peace, there is another thing that fits into your question. There are two types of companies. There are those who want to do everything near their home office, and there are those who've adopted the model localize to globalize. It's the second category you're looking for because going back to what I was saying about making it so that the population feels there's a total benefit to them in what you're doing, means they have to see new industry, new jobs coming in. You can't just be a place that is consuming and leaving most of the margin that comes from a business to somebody else. And so one of the activities for promoters that you always have to do, no matter what country you're promoting in, is to find the people who have the view on where you are or who you can convince where you are to actually do something and bring some of their manufacturing or expertise or job training, whatever, to to the area where you're trying to do your development. And that's a real key, I think, to successful cross-border development long term.
Thanks so much, you. Very, very valid point. And I think that's why we need a lot of R&D. We need a lot of R&D in Africa. Right. So right now, I'll hand over to the audience. If you have any question, you could raise your hand. And yeah, Victor would allow you to unmute so you can ask our panelists if you have any question before we continue the panel session.
I see Joshua wrote in the chat. Don't know if he wants to ask his question.
Okay, let me try to go to the chat. Okay, I can see another hand. Let me see, what's Joshua's question?
Maybe it came just to me.
Okay, I can't see.
Let me go ahead and bring it up if that's okay. It
Okay.
might help. So the question is, as an African financial institution, what role can be played in driving decarbonization initiatives that I talked about? And you know, when I look at it, I think when we saw that map of Africa and some of the projects happening, I'd say ammonia. So look at your agricultural footprint and fertilizers used, and look at ammonia is usually a huge opportunity in many, many regions of the world for different technology that can be much more local and drive decarbonization. Cement is another one, but that takes a lot more investment, but maybe the dialogue could begin if there's local cement manufacturing. Trucking certainly is, and that we had a previous question related to transportation and trucking. Electrification of trucking in a regional basis is probably the right answer, but it's also slower in coming. And long haul trucking is a hydrogen answer, which is also long in coming. The other thing I'd say is for ports. So ports where ships come in. Electrification of the equipment at a port is another opportunity that is surprised me, like the Port of Los Angeles, which is, I believe, the largest port in the United States, have made incredible progress with electrifying some of their cranes and offloading the ships. And that really surprised me how much progress they've made in a very short period of time. It doesn't mean, I mean, they've been talking with different groups, probably over 5 years, but once those groups aligned on a plan, the action that happened was really incredible. So that was one question. Back to you, Peace.
Yeah, thank you very much, Gail, for bringing that up. So I can see someone was raising up their hand, and Bethel is flooding our chats with his companies, products. All right, so let me allow Maxwell to first ask his question before we go to Bethel. So Maxwell, introduce yourself. Let's know where you're talking from.
Okay. Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone. My name is Maxwell, and I represent our company, Climate Actions Limited, hosted in Nigeria. I'm currently speaking from Rome, Italy. I'd like to ask a couple of questions, one to UPs, and the other I'd like to ask to Hughes and Gay. So the first one, I'd like UPs to tell us, yeah, carbon market, or I mean, the carbon, when you talk about carbon credit, it's actually a very familiar, a very familiar term. People hear about carbon credits, but I speak for myself, and I'm sure for some persons here, we would like to know exactly in a precise term, how does carbon credit contribute, to GHG or emission reduction? In a clinical term, how does it affect, carbon emission? And the second question is regarding DAC. And I'd like to channel the question to carbon sequestration. I'd like to know, Ms. Gale and Hugh, I'd like to know, what are the risks attached, to carbon sequestration? Are there any risks? And of course, this captured, that's the sequestered carbon, or how do I, if I'd like to put it this way, like it's the end location of this captured carbon. And so when this carbon are sequestered, do they really have any risk, any other environmental risk to humans and the environment? Thank you. That's just the two questions. I don't know if I'm being precise enough.
All right, thank you, Maxwell. I think Gil and U had a question, so probably they could respond to that.
Which one shall we respond to first, Peace?
I think the last one on carbon sequestration.
Yeah, in terms of, I always say there is a risk of anything. Some of the carbon sequestration does have the potential to have the same problems as fracking if you haven't done the geological studies correct and that sort of thing. However, at present they appear to be minimal. Clearly, as you can't keep pumping carbon dioxide into the ground without running into a problem of an accident. It's just like people said, we sequester carbon, we'll start planting trees. And we planted trees all over the world. And then Canada managed to burn down a whole bunch of them and took a couple of decades worth of sequestered carbon and put it back into the atmosphere. You see the same thing occurring in other major forest fires, and it's decreased significantly the value of tree planting for carbon sequestration. There's another thing, though, that is going on that needs to be addressed when you talked about direct air capture or carbon sequestration. And that is there are chemicals that are in high demand that can be produced if you take sequestered carbon and you use electrochemical processes that are not currently actually in commercial operation. The one I'm most familiar with is being developed by a group of chemical engineers in Florida who are taking and using electrochemical processes to produce a number of different organic compounds. And they're also focusing on the production of compounds that themselves are biodegradable. So there are things that can be done with CO2. The initial thinking was it would be very difficult because CO2 is actually a very stable material. However, using the electrochemical processes, which you can institute using alternative energy approaches to generate the electricity, so you still remain carbon neutral, is a way to sequester CO2, produce other products, and eliminate other processes that emit carbon to produce those same products. So there is that road of the technology is also going on, but it's new, and so I'm not going to say there's zero risk, although we've been pumping CO2 into the ground for a long time in connection with oil recovery, and there's an awful lot of depleted oil fields where it could be just done again, so put back into the ground to just stay there. So that's my comment on the question.
Thanks so much, U. So I missed the first part of the question that Maxwell asked me. I don't know if Maxwell can come again. He asked me a question.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sure. You're audible.
Yeah.
Okay. Before that, I'd like to say, yeah, that response was nice, and thank you to Hughes. And so the other question I said, like, carbon credit, how precisely does it contribute to emission reduction?
All right. So we have two projects, carbon reduction and carbon removal. Those are like the two major carbon credit projects we have across the globe, right? When you talk of carbon reduction projects, you have the likes of solar, likes of wind, etc. For carbon removal, you have direct air capture and sequestration, just like you mentioned. So when it comes to the impact on reducing emissions, it's in both ways. So imagine you are switching from fossil to diesel to solar, right? That means you're offsetting an amount of emissions, right? The other aspect is the removal, whereby you remove CO2 that's been trapped in the atmosphere, right? So those are the two ways whereby we are actually reducing emission being used. And what companies do, I think that was the last question I was going to ask you and Gil, was that how do we encourage our corporate buyers to actually invest in carbon credits projects? So for instance, companies that are actually high emitters, what they do to help the environment is to invest in renewable energy solutions through the instrument of carbon credits. So I also emphasize in my presentation that carbon credits are instruments of financing. So carbon credits is just a mechanism to channel finance into cleaner sources of energy, such that you have a pipeline to monitor the flow of financial resources, develop better projects for the environment. And also, it's also a way to help these companies to transit into cleaner sources of energy as they commit to sustainable goals. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, I think there's a second part to Maxwell's question.
Okay.
And that part has to do with what do you do with the person who goes out and buys lots and lots of carbon credits and just pollutes like mad using the carbon credits to offset them? That's the reason, first of all, that you have a cap. And the purpose of the cap is to keep somebody from doing that. And over time, that cap will probably be reduced. The carbon credits are the vehicle that permits you to take people who are ahead of the curve and have the people invest in those, which will be appreciating in value because there's a demand for these permits. And that's why I use the word permits on carbon credits. And it permits someone to exceed their cap, but they can't go wild about it. So over time, it brings it down, but it facilitates the financing of the projects and the investment. And it's not something, and that's how you see getting to not zero carbon, but remember, the expression is net zero. We're trying to get to where whatever carbon is emitted is being offset by something else. And I think that's the second piece of the answer. And the way this can come about is it's like grain trading, other metals trading. We're going to see the financial organizations, the Morgan Stanleys, and the things like Rothschild banks, starting to invest in these and bring investors into them, because as demand goes up for carbon credits, their value will also be appreciating.
Thank you so much, Hugh, for that wonderful answer. I can also see some other questions as well in the chat. So I would just like to point out some of them, and hopefully we can also, get an answer for that as well. So this is a question that I think you would be best to answer, Hugh. So we have Temitope who's asking if there are enough projects, in Africa's pipeline to contribute meaningfully to the global decarbonization goals, just like the chart you showed, where there are several projects, in Europe, just above, and the USA as well, which you've mentioned. Or do we actually need more investments, to actually contribute meaningfully? That was the term that was used there.
It's a good question, and it's one that I don't really have a good answer for. And I'll talk if you look at it, the gross domestic product, the highest gross domestic product in Africa is in South Africa, $400 billion a year. Nigeria, to focus on the country we're most interested in, because this is where our audience is from, has a gross domestic product of $200 billion a year. That leaves you, and if you look at the history of investments, Nigeria has had a boom bust. They'll have a big project. There's the big projects, and then it will have just a series of small projects, which makes it hard to have a continual development. That puts you back to national policy and what we were talking about earlier, and that's really where you're talking about country building, which is beyond the scope of my knowledge of Nigeria, because it was decades ago that I was in Nigeria, and I know it's changed. We wouldn't have had this type of a webinar if we had webinar technology when I was in Nigeria. So, but I think when you look at the potential for growth and the potential for raw materials, there is a tremendous market, and there is tremendous need globally for things that Nigeria can produce. And also there are groups were interested in investing in. So I think the pipeline is not defined, but the pipeline can become defined. And this goes back to something Gail said, and that is there are a lot of companies who have an interest in this and are looking for places that are interested in companies that come in and to do development that is environmentally conscientious. And I think that's the other side of what needs to be done to make this big scale. So net, you need to be promoting small scale to get your population interested in it, and big scale talking to people about what else can be done there and talking to the ones who are interested in it.
Right. Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Hugh. I don't know if Gail would also want to, speak to that. We also still have one more question, and then maybe we'll call it off from there. But Gail, yeah, I don't know if you have some other addition to what Hugh has said.
Yeah, I think fundamentally we all know around the world we share the globe, right? We share air, and we don't have enough projects. I think continue to look at whatever groups you think are making momentum and try to participate in that in a way, but in a way that's selective. And that's very hard to do. I think you're already focused in some ways, but what can the African Carbon Market Initiative, which you're very aligned with, how can that help you? And don't be afraid to ask them for what you need, right? Those kind of initiatives publish reports, lots of great little charts, but a little dialogue telling them what you need could be more influential. So I think we ought to take our last couple questions, Victor.
Yeah, sure. We're almost on time there. So thank you so much once again, Gail and Hugh. I hope that question has been answered as best to the person that asked. And we have one more question, which I would like to take. This question is from Bethel, who currently runs Grover's Energy Limited. So he's actually a solar-based company in Africa. And his question specifically is asking, how do we offset carbon credits? I assume that question, let me rephrase, since it is most likely asking how he can generate carbon credits, especially being a solar company as he is. And a follow-up on that is asking how he can, fundraise and scale up the sustainable innovation project that they've created at Grover's.
All right, so let me just ask this last question so that you and Gail can respond and give their final thoughts. All right, so the last question let's ask is, how can we encourage corporate companies, big companies, to commit more to buying carbon or investing in carbon credit projects? I know recently we've had some companies pull back because the administration currently in the US is not supporting climate financing. So some have said, oh, they'll stop sustainable investments. But what do you think? What do you think should be the rallying point in terms of discussion when we are discussing with big corporate buyers regarding the carbon markets that is actually emerging over here in Africa?
I'll take a little bit real quickly. I think awareness is key, and that's hard to do, right? You're trying to break through all the noise they hear. So maybe get someone they're already talking to or aligned with or partnered with to introduce you. I think you got to be very clear on your pitch to them, like what's in it for them and why would they, in their view, why would they take a risk being aligned with you? And help them see how that's not a risk after all, and it's an opportunity. These things also take time, right? They have to cook. So it's going to take a number of interactions. And you might need 6 of them in order to get a real dialogue with one. The ratio of effort can be large. But I think having someone that's trusted by them and they're already working with introduce you as a trusted source that deserves their time, that would be key. Hugh, do you have any answers?
Yeah, I think I have two that fit in with yours. If I heard the first question correctly, though, I thought I heard that the individual has solar power generation and is wondering how he can get carbon credits or actually sell carbon credits to somebody else. And if I heard that question right, the first thing he needs to do is get an accredited assessor on the project, on his projects, to look at what is its actual carbon reduction rate, because it has to be certified before any financial institution that brings money in to reimburse you for carbon credits has to be sure that your savings indeed are real, your operating factor is real. So if that's indeed, if that was part of the question, I just that's the big stumbling block, is getting the right certification up front and then making the contacts. Now, the second part of it, I think it's much of Africa is raw material resource development. Taking minerals and refining them, taking forest products, producing other products out of them, etc. Gail talked about companies that are in that business. There's a category of company that we haven't raised in this conversation so far. It's a trading company. And if you look in Europe at Switzerland, there are a large number of companies that invest in raw material upgrading types of projects that also are involved in funding of carbon credits and investing in that sort of thing. And I would say that to the list of companies and places which you look for financing for development, you also take a look at companies that don't produce something. Their business instead is trading it and shipping it as raw, as refined product to others who work with it.
All right. Thank you so much for that answer, Hugh and Gil. In fact, I know this webinar has been a lot of answers and a lot of questions. I'm sure even if we stay through the entire day, we'll keep getting questions, and and they'll just keep coming in. Yeah. So thank you once again for that wonderful question there. I don't know, Peace, do you still have any other thing, or then we can hand over to Bolu to take it away for us?
Yeah, I would just like to thank you and Gil once again for this amazing session. Also thanks to Tom Rem. You can see Tom on the call. I can also see some other people who came in and left. Right. So the recording will be available after the call. And we're also live streaming on YouTube. Right. So you'll see the link to catch up on the session later. Right. So yeah, I'll hand over to Bolu so we can wrap up for the day. Thanks so much, everyone. Does Tom have anything to say? Okay, I think Tom wants to talk.
I just wanted to thank you for putting this together, Peace, and Gail and Hugh, and I appreciate learning a little more. I thought I knew quite a lot about this area, but I have learned today. It's one way of raising capital, and maybe it needs a lot of improvement, but it's certainly important.
Yeah, thanks so much, Tom. All right, really happy to have you here. All right, so Bolu, you can wrap up for the day.
Okay, so thank you, Peace. Firstly, thank you to everyone for joining us today for this insightful session on understanding the role of carbon markets. It's been an engaging discussion, and I hope you've gained valuable knowledge on how carbon markets play a very crucial role in sustainability and climate action. This is the first of our energy transition series, so there's actually more to come. So if you have any suggestions on topics you would like us to speak on for our next webinar, please reach out. Please feel free to let us know. A huge thanks to our incredible speakers, Hugh James and Gail Gibson, for sharing their expertise and shedding light on the future of carbon markets. And thank you so much, Peace, for moderating. We also appreciate every participant who took out their time to be here, to ask questions, and to contribute to the conversation. Special thanks to our organizing team, Victor, and every other person behind the scenes who made today's event possible. Your efforts are truly appreciated. So at Chemotronics, we are growing and we are actually looking for passionate individuals to join us. We have an opening for social media and communication intern. So if you're interested in making an impact in the climate space, or this just sounds like something that you would want to be a part of, I'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear from you. All right. So, lastly, I would say that we are always open to partnerships and collaborations to further drive carbon reduction and removal initiatives. If you'd like to learn more about our work or explore ways to collaborate, feel free to reach out to us at info@chemotronics.org, or you could check out our website, www.chemotronics.org. Right. So, once again, thank you all for being part of today's session. We look forward to continuing this conversation, in our upcoming series and working together for a more sustainable future. We will also send a survey to your emails after this webinar to gather feedback so that we can, improve in our other webinars to come. All right. Thank you.
Bye,
All
everyone.
right. Thank you,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone.
Bye. All right.
Goodbye.